Yeah, so welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Rhys Williams, who is the founder of UBI Lab Wales, which advocates for universal basic income in Wales. So thank you very much. I'm really grateful for your time. There's obviously a huge amount of stuff going on in Wales with UBI. Definitely the most exciting place in the UK, I think, possibly even in Europe. But before we get on to all that, the place I start most UBI interviews is most people come into the movement, it seems to me, from kind of two directions. So first of all, there's the old leftist direction, which is they like UBI because it's redistributive and because it would abolish absolute poverty. And then there's the more sort of techno direction, which is they think that UBI is necessary because future technology in the next few decades is going to produce mass technological unemployment, and therefore we're going to have no choice. So you have a kind of weird alliance between some quote left-wing figures and people like Elon Musk and Silicon Valley. I mean, do you come in it more one direction or the other, or are you kind of like a combination of both?
I think as I've got into the idea, probably a bit of both, but certainly the reason I got into the idea was from an old leftist perspective. So just to give you, I suppose, a bit of background about how I actually sort of stumbled across the idea. Really, it was so before so I'm a lawyer by day. At UBI, I advocate by night, and although I haven't got the cape just yet, James, but so before that, I was a trade union representative, and I remember many moons ago when I still had hair, there was somebody that come to me asking for representation because her employer was going to increase her hours from 16 to 20. They were renewing all these new contracts at the organisation which she was working, and she said to me essentially, "Look, I'm a single mum, and if they increase my hours, then I'm going to lose out on these child tax credits. But in addition to that, I'm also going to have to pay. I'm going to have to pay increased childcare and so on, and travel costs and all the rest of it. But it was the child tax credits that I was quite ignorant to how it all worked, to be honest, at the time, and I remember." Sitting there thinking, this can't be right. How are you working, 4 hours more a week, across the month? By the end of it, you're like, I think she was like, a couple of $100 worse off. I just thought it was bizarre.
That's awful.
And so I, it's sort of in my nature to go away and sort of squirrel away and have a look at, try and find some answers. And I stumbled across Malcolm Tory's book, Money for Everyone. And it'd just been released at the time. It was, sort of fresh off the press. And so I thought, and I was going away for some sort of meeting, I think it was. And I thought, I'll buy that. I've got to travel on the train for a couple of hours. And so I'll have a read. Long story short, by the end of it, I was in love with the idea. I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. This could solve so many problems. It pointed out the marginal tax rate people face, so people only actually make 20p on the pound if you take all of these benefits away and so on. And I was just blown away. And I thought, why on earth, are people not shouting from the rooftops about this idea, And so from there, I sort of badgered all my friends and was like, this is unbelievable. And sort of, I was an armchair admirer for a long time. And then I had a baby almost 2 years ago now. And I think that sort of changes you a little bit. And I thought, right, okay, and I just sort of finished my training contract as well. So I was looking for something else to sort of sink my teeth into. And I thought, let's try and get a pilot up and running. And that was sort of before Christmas time. 2019, and then obviously the pandemic struck a couple of months later, or a few months later, and so we were all on lockdown. And from there, I sort of thought, well, I've got plenty of things to do. I've got plenty of time to kill now, sort of stuck at home. So I got in touch with the UBI Lab network and said, can we set up a lab? So that's sort of how I got into it, and I've not turned back since.
I mean, it's really interesting about the background, and I do want to get in a little bit later about kind of if there's any tension between perhaps left-wing advocates and techno-progressive advocates, kind of how they fit together. But to get straight onto kind of the meat of this, which is obviously the Welsh government has very excitingly said it plans to do a trial, and so I believe most of the audience is probably American, so I should say that Wales is kind of one of the 4 constituent countries of the UK, but it has its own government as well, which is elected by the Welsh people, with First Minister Mark Drakeford, who has obviously come on board, is very keen on this idea. I mean, how much details do we have about what they're planning specifically?
Very little at the moment.
I'm glad you said that, because I was searching on the internet, and if it was just me, I couldn't find it, I'd be worried.
Yeah, no, it's not your research skills, James. It's mum is the word at the moment. So I think there has been there's been bits and bobs, I suppose. There's sort of been this indication that they're going to trial it with care leavers, and I think the reason for that is it's within their gift to do it. So of course, welfare isn't devolved in Wales at the moment.
Yeah.
So having the powers to change people, the way they distribute welfare, for example, is not within Mark Drakeford and the Welsh Government's gift at the moment. So I think that's probably why they're saying care leavers. In addition to that, I know from conversations with people, close to the Welsh Government, that it's something that, that cohort of people, Mark Drakeford is in particular, he has a soft spot for them, which I suppose, and thinking about it, it's if you're going to pick a cohort of people that need some assistance, then people leaving care, for example, is certainly somebody that you should be looking at.
Yeah.
But it's so that there's very little at the moment, and I suppose we'll probably get onto this in a moment, but we're hoping that he can be persuaded to do a geographical pilot rather than just care leavers.
Yeah, I mean, presumably the idea is, because obviously if you can show that it works, because my understanding what Mark Drakeford is after is he would then push for perhaps a larger pilot scheme with UK government backing. That's what he really wants, because he was very specific about not having UK government support, and obviously that puts huge limits on what he can do.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, really, isn't it? Because I think that Mark Drakeford has quite clearly said that he's a unionist, and I think he wants this to be an idea that the whole union gets behind. And you're quite right. Perhaps he's thinking, well, we'll do it on a small scale initially, show that it works with this particular cohort, and then perhaps if there's a Labour government in 2023 or 24, whenever Boris, I suppose, calls the election. That might be his thinking. So I think that's probably where he's at the moment. I mean, he has made a bit of, he said on a number of occasions that he's going to need Westminster to help him fund it as well. I mean, I'm not convinced by that argument. I think that there are ways in which you can pilot it, a geographical pilot or community pilot, whatever you want to call it, really, and it can be done with not. People are looking, for example, people look at these pilots and they think hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds or whatever it is. I don't think that necessarily is the case. I think you could probably do it for, you could run a 2-year pilot or 3-year pilot, and you could probably do that for 20-30 million a year, which isn't I think if you look at how much money we've spent on the pandemic, for example, just look at test, track and trace. I think, what did they spend? 12 billion on that, and didn't go particularly well, did it? So I think that's a drop in the ocean when you think about it, particularly because this could be, such a transformative idea. It's 20 million a year for something that could completely change society is, to me, certainly worth a punt.
I mean, we mentioned my research skills earlier. I was trying to kind of find the Welsh Government plans, and I couldn't. But what I did find was there was one plan by, I think, Tank called Autonomy. I don't know if you've seen that, which seemed very ambitious. So their proposal, which is, it's not official and it probably won't become official because it seems very ambitious. But 5,000 people for a 24-week trial. And they wanted to split one rural area, one urban area. And I think it would cost £50 million a year, they reckon, which equates to about 0.6% of the Welsh Government's budget. So as I say, it seems to me quite ambitious, but aim big. And the proposal was, so for 18 to 64-year-olds to get £213 per week, 65 plus £195, and children £120. Obviously, money would go to their carer. Is this a plan you're aware of? Is this the kind of thing you're thinking, sort of lines you're thinking along?
Yes, so I've read the report, or the proposal. We've had conversations with autonomy before, about what we think a UBI pilot might look like. They've shared what they think a pilot might or should look like. I know that they've used the figures. I think they've gone with the figures from the JRF Foundation. So what they think would be the amounts that would eradicate poverty, which is, I think, £215 per person a week. I think you are right. It's ambitious, and I suppose, thinking of my day job here now, when you're a lawyer, you sort of go in big, don't you? And you try and meet somewhere in the middle. But I think that those types of figures, I think it's commendable, putting those figures in. But I think ultimately, when you're talking about £215 a week per person, I think that it's a hard sell. That I think that it's very difficult. I think you have to be realistic with these types of things as well. And I think the Welsh government, of course, will have in the back of their mind, people who are, one, don't really know about this idea, and two, the types of voters who might think, hang on, you're going to give 5,000 people 215 quid a week. I mean, it's not going to go down well, is it? With a lot of people, and I think it's ammunition for the Conservatives, for example, to say whoa. So I think that you have to be realistic. I mean, my preference, for example, would be for you to. I like what autonomy have said, and we in our conversations with them, we said the same thing. We think that you should get rid of the subsistence benefits, and replace them. I think because if you're keeping all benefits, for example, and you're just adding money on top, then you're losing a significant element of basic income, which is that emancipatory effect. But by having people still in receipt of this standard allowance of universal credit, then they're still going to have to meet all these behavioral conditions, for example, and that doesn't free them up to do these things that all us UBI advocates are saying that you would be able to do if you had a UBI. So I agree with them on that. But my preference would probably be to reduce the amounts. I think somewhere in the region of £150 a week would probably be a little easier to sell, because you of course then only have people, for example, people on a standard allowance, they receive, I think, £79 a week. So you're actually, if you're taking them as a participant, then you're actually only in fact putting on 60 quid extra on top of what they already would be receiving anyway. So I think that if they were to have that 150 quid or £140 somewhere in that region, so I think that would be my preference, and I think that would probably look a little more. I think that would be a bit more appealing to Welsh government. I think you could sell it as well to the public a little easier as well. I think when you're talking about 200 quid, I think just people's eyes would pop out to their head. It's going to be tough.
Are you in contact with the Welsh government as a kind of on behalf of UBI Lab Wales?
No, so we've not had any contact with Welsh government, but I'm hoping that
because you're one of the main groups in Wales advocating for this. That seems the obvious thing.
Yeah, so I know from my conversations with people that they are literally at this. It's very fresh. They're sort of mapping out a lot of things at the moment. I think that like I said, they have it in their heads that it might be care leavers, but I think they're looking at what stakeholders to engage. They're sort of, Jane Hutt is sort of, I think, strategizing at the moment. So I would expect them to give us a call. It would make sense, particularly because, and they're going to sound a bit modest here, I suppose. No, but it was our pledge campaign that sort of got them, I think, over the line with this. We got 106 candidates to back our UBI pledge, and 25 of those candidates are now sitting in the Senate chamber. Mark Rakeford, when he made the big commitment to Emma Grant, he referenced that 25 members in the chambers, in the Senate chamber as well. So, yeah, I think we've certainly driven the conversation over the past 12 months without blowing our own trumpets too much.
My understanding is that the Lib Dems have endorsed UBI trials kind of nationwide, so presumably they're on board. I presume the Conservatives are not on board. In fact, I've got some statements from them which are quite hostile, which we'll come to in a moment. Are Plaid on board? I'm guessing they might be sympathetic. I mean, obviously the SNP are quite supportive in Scotland. Yes,
so Plaid Cymru are serious advocates of the idea. They've been really, the conversations with some of the members that they have at the moment, been really constructive with them. Luke Fletcher asked a question on Wednesday, I think it was, to Jane Hutt about the UBI. So, Luke has been fantastic with us, and he worked closely with us on the pledge campaign as well. Mabon ap Gwynfor is another member of the Senedd who is a real advocate of this, and he's talked at some of our events as well. So, and Leanne Wood as well, who unfortunately lost her seat. Fantastic, great loss to Welsh politics. But she's a real advocate of this as well. So Plaid have certainly made all the right noises, and probably pushed Labour a little bit in that direction as well. So Plaid have been great, and have to give a mention to Jane Dodds. You mentioned the Liberal Democrats. Jane Dodds is a serious advocate to this. She's been fantastic with us as well. With the lab, work closely with us. So yeah, everyone, I suppose, all the progressive parties are on board. And as you mentioned, the Tories are not. We didn't have a single Tory for the pledge campaign, which wasn't surprising. I think we'd anticipated that. But I think actually, somebody who isn't in the Senedd, who again is a loss to Welsh politics, David Melding, has made all the right noises as well. So we'll wait and see. We never know. We might convince them, James.
I mean, from an English perspective, it's very interesting. But the most exciting things for UBI in the UK are happening in Wales and Scotland. I'm watching ahead of the Scottish Parliament elections this year. There was a leadership election, and for my job, I have to watch stuff like that. I enjoy it, to be clear.
Well, I watch it, and it's not my job, James. Yeah.
But they talked about UBI, and it was really, really interesting. Of the 5 parties represented, so obviously SNP, Labour, Lib Dems, Green, Conservatives, only the Conservatives were opposed. And it was almost that moment where I felt that UBI had kind of arrived on the national stage. And it's one step away from becoming like a UK-wide issue, which is part, as you were alluding to earlier with Mark Drakeford. That's partly why I was so excited by it being a Labour government which is doing it, rather than say the SNP in Scotland, because it could potentially become national policy UK-wide. Yeah. I did want to get on very briefly to the Conservatives. So I wrote a quote down from the Welsh Conservatives who said that Wales can't become a petri dish for failed left-wing policies. Now, what slightly surprised me about that is I totally get why. I should sort of say about my personal background. So I actually used to work for a Tory MP, so my personal background is slightly to the right. And I support UBI, which I know is quite unusual, but it's always seemed to be strange that there are people on the right who think that UBI and Conservatism are incompatible, because I just don't think they are. I think there's a huge range of Conservative arguments for UBI, and I'm pretty sure that eventually in time they'll be adopted, because UBI feels like it's got its inevitability to me. Yeah. I mean, are there any Tories you've been speaking to who've been interested, or is it just a complete blanket?
No Senedd members. There was, so when we passed the motion in the Swansea Council, there were Conservative councillors who spoke, positively about the idea, and they didn't vote against it. I think they abstained as well. So I think that there's sort of, I think there's closet advocates within the Tory party. It's just, it's not the party line, is it? So they're not going to say it. But I think you're absolutely right when you say that, it drives me mad almost, because, people sort of, it's sort of this default attack line. I think Janet Finch-Saunders in Wales, in the Senedd a couple of weeks ago, called it some communist idea, and I'm like, oh, come on, it's not. You only need to pick up a book, really. And Friedrich Hayek was a fan. Milton Friedman was a fan. And you're absolutely right. It's not incompatible with conservatism, right? Because of the individualism argument of it all. So, you know, and small state, and, you know, just give people, you know, I know that the people on the right, that I think it's Charles Murray, that says, you know, just give everyone a UBI and get rid of all the other benefits. That's not where, you know, I would come from. I think that you still need housing and disability and carers benefits as well. But, you know, it's bizarre that people sort of, I think it's bizarre that people think that it's incompatible. And I think that if people actually just did a bit of research, you know, and just looked at it, you know, and I think they would certainly find, you know, that it would be beneficial to, you know, a conservative as well, or the conservative argument. So it's strange, you know, everyone says it's communist and socialist idea, and yeah, and you just think, oh, again.
Yeah. It's weird that people still, I can understand why, you know, maybe 5 years ago people were trying to use that argument, but it's weird that people still use it, considering that most of the world's most prominent business people have, or at least a lot of them have endorsed it. So Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, I think Bill Gates, I'm not totally sure. Oh, they've not necessarily said we need to introduce it now, but they've either said they say it's coming, or we're going to need it, which brings us back kind of where we started, which is the kind of the divide within the movement between the more left wing and the people are kind of more of a technical or techno-capitalist point of view. I mean, is that like a divide you're really aware of? Is this something I'm sort of making up in my brain?
I think that there is certainly some tensions, simply because I think, you know, people on the left, when you start saying Elon Musk likes an idea and he's this, you know, super capitalist, you're just like, oh, hang on, why does he like it? You know, but I think that perhaps there's reservations with people from the left for that reason I just pointed out. But, you know, I personally think that it's a good thing that they're making the case for it, for the precise reason you just mentioned. You know, there's people, you know, Elon Musk isn't a lefty, is he? But, you know, and he's making the argument for it, and he's one of the richest guys in the world, and that's what, you know, people on the right advocate, is, you know, free markets and all the rest of it. So, yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think that, like I said to you, you know, when we first started, really, that I sort of come from an old lefty perspective, you know, trade union background. But you know, the more I've read about it, and particularly I read, you know, a book by I forget his name now, it's escaped me, but Andy Stern, Raising the Floor, and he's an old, you know, he's a trade unionist. He was the president of the biggest trade union in America, and, you know, I think he visited Obama in the first year of his presidency more time than anybody else. So, you know, and he's a massive advocate of it. And where he's coming from is this whole technological, you know, the future of work side of things. And, you know, when people talk about robots, but reading this book, what brought to my attention, I thought, oh, that's an interesting point, was that it's not, you know, AI and all the rest of it. It's actually just software, the developments in software, and how sort of like, you know, how can I put it? It's sort of how people can organize like productivity and all the rest of it. Like, you need less people in a warehouse now because you have this software that can say, do this task at that time, you know, and the advancements in that software, not necessarily just AI, that is that's sort of making, you know, big businesses need less people then, you know. So I think that it's something that needs to be looked at, you know, and I think that, you know, like I said, it's a good thing, isn't it? You know, you've got people like, and just because the profile he's got as well. I mean, if you've got one of the most famous guys in the world saying we need a UBI, like, great, you know, because I think it's important for everybody to remember, particularly UBI advocates, because we live in this little bubble, you know, and we're all like, yes, you know, everyone's talking about a UBI. It's like, no, actually, we're just talking about ourselves. Yeah. But, you know, I think that it's important that, you know, the profile of UBI is raised as well, because I think, you know, it's quite startling, really. I read a Times Radio poll back last year, and it might have improved now, you know, given that, you know, particularly the Welsh pilot has certainly put it on the map a bit more in the UK. But I think it was 8% of people knew what a UBI was. Yeah. You know, and more people knew what a SPAD was, although we had this whole thing about Dominic Cummings a couple of months before about him, you know, the Barnard Castle. So that's probably why more people know what a SPAD is, you know. But yeah, I thought that was that raised my eyebrows, certainly. I thought, wow.
I mean, I don't know about you, but the point where I started finding that people who I wouldn't say are sort of like, follow politics closely started mentioning it was the Andrew Yang campaign. So it's particularly obviously Americans, but I mean some Brits as well. That gave it a huge status boost, and that was kind of the point where it became, I mean, obviously you say far from a household name still, but not just something that policy wonks talk about. I mean, I don't know if that's something you agree with, or if you think there's other factors which have kind of exploded its public interest.
No, I think you're bang on. I think you're absolutely right. I think I remember Andrew Yang, running, and the cards on the table. I was a Bernie fan, but but he was sort of my second pick just because he was back in UBI, and I thought, oh God, that's incredible. That you've got a guy running for president saying we need this policy. It was fantastic, and it certainly instilled confidence in me. Put it that way. It was part of the reason why I was thinking about trying to do a pilot in Wales before the pandemic hit. It gave me a bit of confidence, and I didn't read Rutger Bregman's book for a while either. Everyone's telling me to read it, and it's just one of those things. I'll get around to it, and then he mentioned it in his book as well. And then I think it was another book by I think it was Good Economics for Bad Times or something. But I can't remember the author, but they mention it as well. So you're absolutely right. I think that Andrew Yang, sort of the interest exploded, and then Scott Santons has been brilliant as well, hasn't he? He's really pushed the idea. Great guy, Scott, as well.
Yeah, no, I had him on this channel a couple of months
ago. I did see, James. Yeah, I did say. Yeah, he's fantastic, Scott. And he's really clever guy as well, obviously.
We're meant to be having an interview. I don't remember when it was, but it was a couple of months before that. And it was the best excuse for getting out of an interview. Like, I can't do it because there's a literal hurricane associated. But fair enough. I'll take that as an excuse.
Yeah, the monsoon coming. I think Andrew Yang certainly put it on the map, didn't he, in America? And then you've got Humanity Forward that are really doing some good stuff as well. And then the pandemic, of course, has just made it explode in the UK as well. I think that's probably put it on the map here. Put it on the map. Andrew Yang put it on the map in America, and I think the pandemic has put it on the map in the UK.
I mean, do you think that's because we got used to mass state intervention with things like the furlough scheme? We become accustomed to a more, even the Conservatives have become accustomed to more of an interventionist government, or do you think there's something more fundamental or something different the pandemic's changed?
I think furlough has certainly helped. I think there was a piece in the Guardian, actually. I think it was Zoe Williams that said exactly that. That furlough has sort of shattered the glass window, or whatever the term is. But yeah, I think that certainly helped. Because people can see that in times of trouble, it's government that should really be stepping in to help people out. It's why you elect them, isn't it? To sort of look after their citizens. And so I think the furlough has helped. And I think that I think the pandemic has sort of, everyone has seen the problems with universal credit and all the rest of it. I mean, people, self-employed people that the 3 million excluded. There's a big campaign. Everyone should have heard about it by now. Of 3 million people that have had no assistance at all. And which is just crazy, isn't it? You think that in a pandemic that these people just haven't had any support whatsoever. And then you've got some, there's so many punitive measures involved with universal credit as well. You have so much savings, you can't have it. So X amount of household income, you can't have it. And you think, well, yeah, but these people got bills to pay. That piece of paper that says they've got X, Y, and Z doesn't mean that they can actually still live. So I think that people have seen, and people who never thought that they would have to sign on to universal credit as well, people in the middle classes that have lost their jobs, I think that they've seen now that they're just 2 paychecks away from being in serious trouble. And I think that if you had this universal basic income where it provides a floor or a safety net or whatever you want to call it, that would help everyone. I think that people are seeing that the advantages of that now. So yeah, I think that's the pandemic is sort of furlough, and the problems with universal credit and the punitive cut-off points with that has probably made people think actually we need something different now.
Yeah. I mean, that feeds in very neatly to what I would have said is the Tory argument, which I don't actually hear very often. But in terms of individual freedom, I mean, if you're, as you say, you're one paycheck away from disaster, or if you're facing disaster, you're not really free in any real sense of the word. I mean, a basic income level is part of any fundamental level of individual liberty. And of course, it's integral to allowing people to set up companies. And I think they call it "fuck you" money in Silicon Valley, having enough money to tell your boss that you're off, you can do your own thing. I was really interested though about the trade union angle, because I've spoken to quite a few UBI advocates in the UK, and obviously UBI is very much more popular on the left than the right. But I've heard that the TUC and the wider trade union movement is still a little bit reticent. I don't know if that matches your experiences.
Yeah, and as you were sort of building up to that, I was thinking, you mentioned when you said about have enough money to tell your boss to do one, that's why I don't understand why the trade unions don't back it, because I think it actually strengthens collective bargaining rather than more than anything, because bad employers can no longer have you over a barrel. If you want to go out and strike, okay, fine, I can do it now because I've got this UBI to back me up. I don't need to worry about not paying me for that particular day. So I think, and also actually, I think people forget this. People have more money for trade union fees as well. So why not? But I mean, from as a trade union member myself, and someone who came from this or discovered the idea whilst being in the trade union or working for the trade union, I do find it baffling. I really do. And I think that, the trade unions, they need a policy to get behind, as well. And I think the trade unions need to start thinking about the future of work and what that's going to look like, and how people who are highly skilled, who are no longer going to be working because of automation and so on. So I think that the trade unions really need to start looking this properly. And Andy Stern, biggest trade unionist in America, backs this idea. That tells you something. But going back to your point, I digress. It is my experience that they don't want they really sort of, I don't know, it's an odd one really, but they're not too positive about the idea. Although I must say, the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union, I've met with some of the officials there, and they're really positive about the idea.
Okay.
I think that if you get one big trade union that comes out and says, we like this, I think that you'll likely find that there'll probably be a couple more, that will come out to the closet, so to speak, and say, actually, yes, we like it as well. I think it'll be that domino effect. And the fact that you've got a Labour government in Wales then as well that are backing this idea, then it's probably going to help. So I think it's an inevitability, much like everything else with UBI. I think it's an inevitability now. It's just a when. And I think that it's down to campaigners such as ourselves to start making the case and saying, look, get on the train now, so that you're not sort of playing catch up with it as well.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, I mean, if you get a couple of major trade unions on board, you have a trial going in Wales, that gives you a pretty good angle to try and have it implemented via conference or via other means as Labour Party policy. I mean, let's face it, Starmer needs a big idea, and this is a big idea. I mean, as I say, personally, I prefer the Conservatives to be keen on it, but realistically, that's not going to happen anytime soon. I mean, you mentioned that you've been trying to set all up yourself before the pandemic. I mean, how did you find that? Were people kind of keen to help, or was getting, like, I assume you needed business people or trade unions to fund it or something?
So it was. So it's through my work that I sort of thought about the idea, and it was at the time. So as I mentioned, I read Rutger Bregman's book Utopia for Realists, and in that he talks about a small-scale pilot in London with homeless people, and how successful it was. These people got jobs, they found permanent places to stay. They reconnected with family members as well, which I thought was, I'm a sucker for a story like that as well. So I thought that was great. And at the time, we'd set up a pro bono advice clinic for homeless people called Cardiff Lawyers Care. And and it was sort of in that clinic, I was thinking, and reading the book at the same time, I was thinking, oh, I wonder if we could sort of have some sort of, sort of, we could get these two things together, and perhaps run a pilot. And so I started talking to councillors in the area, Labour councillors in the area, and a few of them were really positive about the idea. And I chatted with them, and they talked about some funding that I could potentially apply for, where we could have this sort of like small scale pilot in Cardiff. So it was just sort of a few back and forths, like I said, in sort of late 2019. And you know what it's like with anything, it's sort of, you have a conversation one month, and then the next month you don't speak for ages. And then, so like I said, we had a few back and forths, and then all of a sudden, before we know it, the pandemic has hit. So that put a spanner in that works. And at the time, then I was thinking to myself, why not think bigger? So I got in touch with the network, set up UBI Lab Cardiff. And then after conversations with politicians, academics, and a few trade union officials as well, they pointed out that it was probably going to be difficult to do it just in Cardiff, because there's problem in Wales, much like there is in England, where you've got this perception. I'd probably agree with it as well, to be honest with you, that a lot of funding is Cardiff centric, much like it is in London. There's a focus there. So they said, why not expand it to Wales? That's where that happened. That's how that happened, really. Yeah, it was something that, like I said, it was sort of because I was working with these homeless people, I just thought, oh, it'd be great if we could do something like that, and just on a small scale. And then the pandemic put a spanner in that, like I said.
Just kind of one final thought. One thing the pandemic's really brought home to a lot of people, I think, is kind of about the future of work and how we work. And I mean, clearly this fits very much into the automation argument, in that if there are going to be substantial job losses, I mean, obviously that's a very bad thing, but conversely, if machines are doing more of the work and producing the same level of wealth, then we should be able to distribute that wealth and not do the work, if that makes sense. So there is a positive way of looking at it. Is that so? And just before I was speaking to you, actually, I was reading a bit of a report from Iceland that they did a trial for a 4-day week, which has just come out, which was very successful. I mean, it was. I think it was sponsored by the Icelandic government, but I'm not 100% sure. But is this for you kind of part of the mission? I mean, it's not. It is literally about changing, the way our society operates. I mean, kind of killing the 9 to 5 and moving to sort of a different system, possibly enabled by AI and automation.
Yeah, certainly. I think that it's, I think that this, I don't think it's a silver bullet, at UBI. And I think that, everyone seems to, a lot of people who criticize UBI seem to say that, well, it doesn't solve everything, and you're like, well, nothing is going to solve everything, is it? But it's a great foundation upon which we can build from, and I think that it's a massively transformative idea. I think that it's the benefits of it are multifaceted. I think you're absolutely right, that we do have to start thinking about the future and automation and these highly skilled people who are are not going to be able to work, and and we need to start thinking about how we're going to look after those people, and are there ways in which they could contribute to society that like, for example, I don't know, doing something within the community or something like that, and paying them to do that. So I think, and also reskilling as well. Perhaps these people need to go back and retrain to to do green job, new green jobs or that type of thing. So yeah, I think that there is, I think as well, a lot of people are sort of say, well, it's either or with a 4-day week or a universal basic services, and I think that you should be arguing for all of these things. And I think that it was John Maynard Keynes, wasn't it? I think, was it Essays to My Grandchildren or something, where he said that by 2030, we'd all have all this leisure time and all the rest of it. I tell you what, John, you got that wrong, didn't you? But it's I think that it's certainly a way in which we could transform society, like I said, and also I think it's coming from it from a left perspective, it is a mechanism to redistribute wealth. We've seen since the financial crisis that the 1% has got a lot richer, while everybody else's wages have stagnated, and we had quantitative easing for the rich, didn't we, last time, where they sort of bailed out all these banks. And I think now with COVID, we've got to start thinking about sort of quantitative easing for people. Well, I think it's people's quantitative easing, or whatever people call it. But I think that, it's putting cash in people's hands now, rather than, the people who caused the problem last time, although, nobody caused COVID, did they? But yeah, I think it's certainly, it's an idea for the future, and I think you've mentioned it, I've mentioned it, it's inevitable, it will happen, and I think a lot of politicians are beginning to wake up to that fact now, that it is an inevitability. And you mentioned something earlier as well I want to touch on. I think that, Keir Starmer, he needs a big idea, and this could be exactly moment this, it could be Mark Drakeford, it could be his Nye Bevan moment. The NHS started in Wales, didn't it, with Nye Bevan. This could start in Wales now with Mark Drakeford behind it. And I think that Keir Starmer could, I don't understand why Keir Starmer, for example, doesn't, it's no skin off his nose, is it? If he says, well, Wales really want this, there's a Welsh Labour government, Wales really want this, so why is he not in Westminster saying to Boris Johnson, let them do it the way they want to do it? They want a geographic pilot, DWP need to give them the authority to do it. If they're not asking for any more money, what's the problem? Just let them have the powers over distribution, do it. I mean, it'd be a great campaign, wouldn't it? If it worked, for example, in Wales, when we come to that general election, that could be a huge policy idea, and you'd have all the data as well to point to and say, look, it works. This could be, and I said this, when we first started the Cardiff Lab, it could be our generation's NHS. It really could.
Sure.
We could come out to the parallels. It's not hard to see the parallels between, people say all the time, don't they, about the World War and COVID and the similarities. And, we come out to the Second World War, we set up the NHS. Why not, when we come out of COVID now, we set up, a policy that looks after everybody the same way the NHS did. So it's just nonsense. It's a no-brainer for me for Starmer to get behind this idea. And I think that's probably, where we need to focus our attention on now is to try and get Starmer's UK Labour to back it, really, because his secretary or shadow secretary for state for the DWP, Jonathan Reynolds, is a big advocate of this idea as well, but he's probably not shouted from the rooftops about it because the leader isn't. It's not party line at the moment. So yeah, I'm hoping, and he's got a second chance now after Batley. I think people had written him off if he'd lost Batley and Spence. So I think he needs to think bigger, because, some of the, people criticise Jeremy Corbyn, and of course, he got a lot wrong, but, a lot of his policy ideas were popular. It's why he done so well in 2017, for example. He had some really good policies in there. So I think, he does need to start thinking about these radical ideas, if you want to call them that, and I think that this argument made well, for example, and pitched well and explained, because when you explain UBI to people, they think, oh, actually, it sounds a really good idea. Yeah, I just thought everyone's going to be really, really lazy and sit on their backside and just watch this money go into their bank account. But it's not the case. When you explain it, people like it. So you could done well. I think that this could be really a vote winner for him. So hopefully he sees sense on that one.
That's a brilliant line to end on. The NHS of 2021. Oh, it seemed weird because the Lib Dems are quite keen on it, and I wouldn't have expected the Lib Dems to go for it before Labour. I mean, maybe that's just my misunderstanding of the Lib Dems. But no, I was sort of surprised by just how much resistance there has been within Labour. But I do feel, as you say, it does feel like it's starting to change, and there's a lot of kind of grassroots pressure. But yeah, Jonathan, as I say, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much. Really grateful for your time, and best of luck in your work.
Thanks, James. Really appreciate it.
Brilliant.